Hello, it's me, the Nutty Professor again. There's an issue here. I am still the Nutty Professor, but I am working on staying the Nutty Professor and not going beyond nuttiness. Because beyond the Nutty Professor, there could be the crazy professor, and then beyond the crazy professor, there could be the psycho professor, psycho, not sweet, there is a song, and we'll come back to that maybe later. So, and if I go beyond nutty, then it may not be a persona anymore, That's when you start getting into, shadow, and that is the topic for today, We're back to shadow. Now, last podcast, I did talk about shadow, but I talked about it in films. We talked about shadow in 4 films. My father, by the way, really liked that podcast, and he says he wants to watch this one. And I'm like, Dad, this one might be a little personal. And he goes, oh, I want to watch it. So now I have a little bit of an issue because I can't reveal too many personal details. That whole personal detail, that's an issue as well. It has risen in connection. I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I did have conflict with someone, a friend, a long-term friend, who I felt didn't trust me by sharing some very important things in her life while I was her or his. Let's say her or his life. I don't want to give any clues. I won't talk about locations, and anyone I talk about, I try to make it anonymous, so I'll say his or her, So this person, we've had a falling out over trust issues because he or she was afraid that I might reveal things in podcasts about them, and I wouldn't. I mean, as long as you tell me, don't say this, I won't say it. Now they're not a friend, but I'm still not going to go into details, but it has brought the whole how much to reveal issue to the fore, and I don't want to betray anyone's trust, I felt betrayed by that person, and that friendship is, I'm afraid, over, and I might come back to that in a different context in the next podcast, but and I won't reveal anything further about the mechanisms, but that's, but it has brought this whole thing into, made it an issue, so I'm going to try to be careful. I will talk about people, but very anonymously and very generally, and so, however, and that's what's going to make it a bit difficult because I'm now talking about personal shadow. Last podcast was shadow applied in film. Today, and it just so happened that the podcast that we released talked about shadow generally, but shadow issues have been coming up in my own life, and I think I want to discuss some of them, at least personally, and share up to a point some of the processes. Now the whole thing here is, remember, shadow is the dark side. It's come up many times in podcasts, including the last one. For Jung, shadow is what we don't show the world, So, and it's, could be sexual stuff, could be aggressive stuff, could be temper, could be, anything that's not societally acceptable. And the way in which most people deal with shadow, with the dark side, is you deny it. Ego defense mechanism of denial. Come up in previous podcasts, or you project it. You say, I am not the one who's being petty. You're being petty. You project it outwards. So part of the task for Jung is to make the unconscious conscious, is to acknowledge shadow, and to rechannel it. And you know how in my podcast I've been talking in my own system, Patap. My system is about rechanneling shadow energy, all the way through. So awareness, and also, and this is the tough part, is to try to integrate shadow, not deny it, not project it, but integrate it, So it's the dark side, and it has come up in other contexts. Remember, with films, we have Darth Vader, he was Anakin Skywalker, he gave into shadow, he lost his face, he became a mask, all of that stuff. But I'm talking about this more personally now. Now, before I go any further, I want to dedicate this podcast 2. Now, you remember how I have 3 groups that I've been talking about that I intend my podcast for. One is strugglers. I call them strugglers. Not recovering addicts. Again, I'm trying to come up with a judgment-free or language trimming thought, all of that stuff. So these are strugglers who are turning back, turning back from the edge. Now, that's the first group, and I've been addressing those people all along, in people like myself who are trying, battling. I also call us warriors of it. We are battling it. Now, the second group, I called them at one time junkies, and the first one, turning back junkies. Second one, junkies who are not turning back. But a lot of people still, they don't feel comfortable with junkie. I mean, I'm using it positively, affectionately, but people don't feel so let's just say strugglers. So we'll say the second group, strugglers not turning back. And that's, as you've seen in my previous podcast, I will not tell people to turn back. This is not like the 12 steps where the 12th step is once you're saved, you have to go out and save others. I will never tell anyone to turn back. If you're going, keep going. It's your decision, your choice, your process. But I'm dedicating this podcast to the non-turning back strugglers. People that I have had encounters with over many years. Ever since I left teaching, I had a contractor who worked for me who was a non-turning back struggler, junkie, quote unquote. And then since then, over the years, I've had many encounters. Up to fairly recently. So I'm dedicating this to the non-turning back strugglers because it's such a tough life. I've said this before. It's unfathomable to the third group, to civilians, how tough it is, that I mean, every day. And it's not like, if I have a binge, it's every few weeks, and then, then I go clean, or I go to a bar, something happens. But with the non-turning back strugglers, and the ones I'm talking about, these are the people who are daily users, and some of them live on the streets or close to the streets every day, by the skin of their teeth. They survive by the skin of their teeth, and I thank them for trusting me to interact with them and to share their stories with me, and and I also thank them for I've learned a lot from them, but I've also learned about myself through them, and some of the things I've learned in in exploring my shadow, with the non-turning back strugglers. Some of the things I've learned about myself, I don't like, but that's shadow, societally unacceptable, and it's like going, oh shit, that's a part of me, So you have to. That's the tough part, of trying to be non-judgmental of others and of oneself, and to integrate, and to rechannel, So I thank and I dedicate this to all of you non-turning back strugglers, and I'll say to you, I won't say stay strong, because that's I'll say to you, add oil from a previous podcast. Yes, add oil, go for it, whatever it is. You want to just stay safe though. Go for it, stay safe, and it's so narrow. I mean, the margins are so narrow. I mean, daily it breaks my heart sometimes. It really does. And some incredible people, people living, in the margins, but with integrity and courage, and resilience, Now, I'm not romanticizing this. It's the hardest life you can imagine. It's gritty, it's tough, it's dangerous, it's degrading at times, I'm not romanticizing this, But I have admiration for those people. I can't last. I wouldn't have been able to last on a daily basis the way a lot of these people have. So anyway, I've said in a previous podcast, I was like a tourist. Remember? And somebody said to me, you've been given a passport. Yeah, but I have a passport. I can come back. People that I'm talking about, there's no passport, They're there every day by the skin of their teeth, So I dedicate this to them, Now, the whole thing here is, And there are other people who've written about this in the past, people like William S. Burroughs, and the beat writers. And I started by saying, I am trying not to go that next step, not from nutty to crazy. Some people have also called me the naughty professor, nutty and naughty, but I'm trying not to go the next step from nutty to crazy. I met a person during my travels and my journeys who identifies with the song, Sweet But Psycho, and the lyrics are actually almost suit her perfectly. I refer to her as the Sweet But Psycho warrior princess of the mean streets, armed only with wits and courage, So, but I am trying not to. If I go psycho, I probably wouldn't be a sweet psycho, So anyway, this whole thing in terms of identities and a person that I knew from the past, okay, actually, before I get to that, there is a line from a beat poet. His name was Allen Ginsberg, and he was a good friend of Burroughs and Jack Kerouac. And the poem is called Howl. And it starts off, it's a long poem, but just the beginning, the opening of it is, I have seen the best minds of my generation. I'm not calling myself one of those by any means, but I've seen the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging through the streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. But that was the climate of the time. That was the whole thing. These people did a lot of drugs and they did this and they did that. And they were mad. So I'm trying not to get mad. But it leads me to something. One of the people I sort of cut ties with because it was a bit dangerous. He or she. I'm not going to try to identify anyone by location or even gender. But this person, he or she. They were very creative they kind of made up their own language, and it was sort of a slithery language. There was this person's favorite word would be slither, like a snake, a very symbolic animal. But he or she had this alliterative thing where they would refer to those of us, exploring shadow as dusty, decrepit, decaying, deceasing, dumpster, rodent weasels. And I'm not taking credit for this. This is that other person's. I'm attributing it. And she or he would refer to others affectionately. And remember the thing with language? How you use it, who uses it, what they intend. But they would use the term affectionately to refer to me as a rodent weasel. And I'm like, fine, it's the rodent weasel path. It's the slithery path. It's the uncovering of shadow path. Which I have been on and off for some time. Now, thinking of this reminded me of. There is another podcaster. I will not name him. I have nothing against him. I agree with some of his concepts. He's also I don't agree with his politics, but that's a whole other thing. But he is still, I think, a psych prof. He's probably the most famous psych prof on the planet. And he's also, influenced by Jung, the way I am. But he has rules, and the first rule is stand up straight. Don't arch your back, don't slouch, And I think the animal that he talks about is lobsters. But I think sometime I've heard him say, or somebody that follows him say, don't be a weasel, And I'm like going, yeah, I get his point, and he talks about dopamine and this and that and serotonin. But I'm like going, look, there are different paths, And I don't have anything against the dumpster, rodent, weasel path. I'm like, my animal, what I associate with is a cat. Professor is a cat, but Nutty Professor is a cat. But I can shapeshift, needing. But at this point, I also need to get out of the dumpster because, you need to get out of the dumpster and shift from being a dumpster rodent weasel to being a cat, So, that whole thing is this, there are, I think, different paths, and this path actually links to something that has come up in previous podcasts, and the 12 steps of Joseph Campbell, and one of the steps when you're returning home is the trickster energy comes up, Loki, the Norse, everybody knows Loki now because of the films, or Coyote, the Aboriginal, So we've got some, to me, the rodent weasel character is a bit of a Loki, a bit of a trickster, So, the whole thing here is there are, I believe, different paths. You have to know when to pull back, to shift, to integrate, to, and in a way, the fact that I do gravitate towards people like the employee I had, the contractor, after I left teaching. And before I got into teaching, I used to spend a lot of time, rather than with academics, with artists. Also on a slightly different path, and also did use substances, and so on, But after I left teaching, the path became, or the people I interacted with through the person who worked for me when I started a business, which didn't work out, but was very marginal, people living right on the edge or over the edge, and I've learned a lot. I really have, my wish to people, then, as I said, my podcasts are for all three groups as always, but this particular podcast has been dedicated to category 2, the strugglers, non-turning back ones, the ones living marginally day to day, just barely surviving, So my wish to you, and I won't say turn back, okay? I won't say I won't say be saved. Stay safe. Stay safe. Safety. Stay safe. And add oil. And I'm going to do a second part to this podcast, with a couple of other things I want to add, and a very interesting development in terms of tarot reading, so some symbols. So we're going to do a part 2, so stay tuned for that, look out for it, and I wish to say to everybody, particularly to the non-turning back strugglers, stay safe. Bye.